So, dear participants, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So I think now we will start slowly. Probably more participants will joining us, but we start slowly, I would say, because now it's 10:02. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar. So today's webinar is on information exchange of chemicals recommended for listing to Annex 3. My name is Yun Tu. I'm from the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat. I'm based in Rome, Italy, FAO. I will moderate today's webinar. So please allow me to introduce you the webinar today. As you may be aware, one of the key provisions of the Rotterdam Convention is the prior informed consent procedure, also known as the PIC procedure. So the PIC procedure provides all parties with an opportunity to make informed decision to future import of the chemicals listed in Annex 3. So all parties are required to ensure that their exports do not take place contrary to an importing party's import decision. Annex 3 has currently 52 chemicals. As I said, chemicals in Annex 3 are subject to the PIC procedure. It doesn't impose a global ban under the convention, so it is subject to the PIC procedure, Annex 3. Chemicals can be added to Annex 3 if decided so by the conference of the parties by consensus. So currently, there are 5 chemicals that were recommended by the Chemical Review Committee for listing, but the COP has not yet been able to reach consensus. The COP, however, has adopted for each of them a COP decision, which, among others, encourages parties to make use of available information under the convention to make informed decision on future import and to exchange information on those chemicals. So what can you expect from today's webinar? So through today's webinar, the Secretariat would like to make parties more aware of those COP decisions, to show you which information is available under the convention on those chemicals and where you may find them, with the goal to assist parties to implement those COP decisions more effectively. However, the discussion on the listing of those chemicals will take place at the COP meeting during the face-to-face segment next year, but not in the program of today's webinar. So in today's program, there will be a presentation from the Secretariat. The presentation will be given by my colleagues, Ms. Eva Kohlschmidt and Mr. Alexander Mihalovsky. There will be also opportunity for questions and discussions after the presentation. You may want to raise your questions after the presentations by raising your hands or write your questions in the chat room at any time, also during the presentation. So we would be very happy if you will actively participate in the discussions. Now I'm delighted to invite my colleague, Eva Kohlschmidt, to start with the first part of the presentation. So now the floor is yours, Eva.
Thank you, Yun. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. I will now share my screen for the presentation. And wait a minute. Yeah. Okay. I would like to, okay, I start here. Okay, sorry, now we can start. So as you already introduced in this today webinar, my colleague and myself, we will go through the enhancing information exchange on chemicals recommended for listing under Annex 3. And the 5 chemicals recommended for listing, which are COP decisions available, namely Acetochlor, Carbosulfan, Fenthion formulations, Paraquat dichloride formulations, and Chrysolite asbestos. The first 2 fall under the pesticide category, whereas Fenthion and Paraquat dichloride fall under severely hazardous pesticides formulations, and Chrysolite asbestos is an industrial chemical. So, as already mentioned, there are these COP decisions available, and the elements of these decisions are more or less the same for the 5 chemicals. So I'm taking here out the one on Acetochlor. And first of all, the decision notes with high appreciation the work of the Chemical Review Committee, emphasizing the technical quality of the decision guidance document and also the comprehensive information available in the guidance document. It further decides that all requirements have set out in the Convention on the process of listing have been met. It also says that further consideration to amend Annex 3 with Acetochlor in this case should be on the agenda of COP10. And also what also Yun already said, and what is actually the topic of this webinar, is it further encouraged parties to make use of the available information, to make informed decisions on imports, and to exchange information related to the management of these chemicals. And this is a very important topic of the COP decisions, which we also would like to highlight through this webinar. And the information available in the context of the Rotterdam Convention is that there is a dedicated convention website, and also the information is available in the PIC circular, which is coming out twice a year, and we will talk about this later. So on the chemical website, we have this dedicated web page, which is called Chemicals Recommended for Listing in Annex 3, and this is the link. And on this web page, you find different kind of background information, including what we already discussed, the COP decisions and the background information the COP decision was based on. For example, notification and supporting documentation submitted by parties and observers, severely hazardous pesticide proposals submitted by the parties, and additional information, decision guidance documents, chemical review decisions, including recommendations for listing and the rationale, and also what is the main basis is the available COP decisions for each of these 5 chemicals. I will now, this is the dedicated web page, so you can click on the individual chemicals, and then you find all the information I just mentioned. And there is also, now here you see that there are 6 chemicals, but P4 is still not discussed as the COP, has still not been discussed at the COP level, meaning that there is no COP decision available. Therefore, today we only talk about these 5 chemicals, which I already mentioned. So, what information is available on the web page? For Acetochlor, there are the notifications where the final regulatory actions were based on, available from 2 PIC regions from the European Union and 10 West African countries, namely Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, Chad, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Mauritania, the Niger, Senegal, and Togo. And if you're interested in these notifications on the final regulatory actions, the documents can be downloaded here, including the supporting documentations which were submitted by the parties. I just very briefly, what are the areas of concern these final regulatory actions were based on. It was said that there's a high potential for groundwater contamination due to metabolites considered relevant. There was no valid method available to quantify residues in food of plant origin. Acetochlor was also considered to be very toxic to all groups of aquatic organisms, and therefore there was a high risk to aquatic organisms identified. Respectively, this, especially in the West African countries, here referred to the CS countries, it was said there is an upset of management system, in this case respecting buffer zones between treated fields and streams. And as these precaution measures are not possible in the Sahel, it was considered that the use of acetochlor entails an unacceptable risk to human health and the environment. Furthermore, the difficulties for the population, especially in the CS countries, in finding suitable personal protective equipment, which is recommended for the use of acetochlor, which you can also, down here you see a label of acetochlor. Here you see these notifications then have been taken into account by the Chemical Refuge Committee, and they have based their decision on these notifications, which you can see here. This is the decision for recommending in the Russian, which can be downloaded. And also they recommended acetochlor for listing and finalized the decision draft guidance document, which you also can find here on the web page. So all these documents, what I already mentioned, are available on the web page. We already said that COP9, which took place in 2019, adopted the decision on acetochlor. And as they were not able to decide on the listing due to lack of consensus, the listing will be considered by COP10, but June already mentioned at the face-to-face meeting, which will be next year. Again, here you have the link, and you can download the available COP decisions for acetochlor. Carbosulfan, which is also in the category pesticide, there were two notifications from two different PIC regions on final regulatory actions. In both cases, in acetochlor and carbosulfan, the final regulatory actions of the relevant notifications are banning. And you have also for carbosulfan the information available. You find here the notifications and the supporting documentations of the two parties, in this case the European Union, and also the 8 West African countries, namely Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, Chad, Gambia, Mauritania, the Niger, Senegal, and Togo. And this can also be, you find it on the web page. Also quickly, what was the basis on this final regulatory action? It was considered as a risk on consumer exposure, acute risk to children and adults, to certain applications, to certain crops, also risk to groundwater, especially to relevant metabolites. It was also considered toxic to aquatic organisms, whether there was a high risk to birds and mammals identified through feeding on contaminated food items. It's also considered toxic to bees and non-target azopodes. And in the context of the CS countries, as they said, there's the fragile ecology of the CS country already characterized by an imbalance of ecosystems and the disappearance of organisms useful for the environment. So the concern is that this will be even more with these pesticides. And again, the low utilization rate of protective equipment, which was also mentioned before, that there is not a lot of protective equipment available, or it's not run by the farmers. Carbosulfan was also recommended by the Chemical Review Committee to the Conference of Parties that it should be listed as a pesticide on Annex 3. And based on the notification submitted, what we just mentioned, and here again you have the decision of the Chemical Review Committee, the recommendation and the rationale which can be downloaded, and also the draft decision guidance document was finalized, which you have here. And these decisions guidance documents are a product of the convention, which are also supposed to support parties to make informed decisions. What already mentioned, also for Carbosulfan, there has been a COP decision adopted in 2017 at COP8, and again, it will be further considered at COP10 for listing. And here again, you have the COP decision, which can be downloaded. And now I give the floor to my colleague Alexander, who will now talk about the 3 more chemicals and also close up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva. I will share my screen now, so I continue with the presentation. Is it okay? You can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. I will continue now with the next chemical recommended for listing. This is SHPF, the severely hazardous pesticide formulation, Paraquat dichloride. More specifically, it's a liquid formulation or emulsifiable concentrated and soluble concentrate containing Paraquat dichloride at or above 276 grams per liter, corresponding to Paraquat ion at or above 200 grams per liter. And this initially became a candidate chemical based on provisions of the Article 6, when developing countries parties can submit proposals for SHPFs or severely hazardous pesticide formulations. The slide in front of you is showcasing this proposal from Burkina Faso from 2010, which also includes all the supporting documents provided by the party itself and also additionally collected by the Secretariat. And these documents, including the proposal, were the basis for the CRC decision to recommend listing. The next slide, as the title is indicating, is basically providing a glimpse, an excerpt of the proposal submitted by the party, mainly from the human health incident report that was accompanying the proposal, describing the incidents from Gramoxone super, which was used in Burkina Faso as a herbicide total herbicide in cotton, rice, and maize. And incidents were reported based on survey on farmers and were including 53 males between 29 and 65 years old who had applied the product in the field. The incidents occurred between 1996 and 2010 in 3 regions. The product was applied using backpack sprayer, and in many cases little or no personal equipment was worn as a result of various factors such as lack of financial means to acquire this kind of equipment, inappropriateness of personal protective equipment for the local conditions, climatic conditions in the country, and also underestimation of the use of the dangers of the pesticide. And the proper PPE was worn only in 0.31% of the cases. In the incident report that you can see yourself and download, you can notice that various adverse effects were reported, like headache, excessive sweating, itching, skin burn, rashes and sores, fever, dizziness, bone pain, fainting, breathing problem, etc. And this was the basis for the CRC to recommend to the conferences of the party that in accordance to Annex 4, Part 3 of the convention text, that this severely hazardous pesticide formulation should be listed into Annex 3. You can in this slide you can see that in the web page dedicated for the chemicals recommended for listing, that the rationale is available, and you can download it from there, where you can find all the reasons why the SHPF form was meeting the Annex 4 criteria. And you can also find the draft DGD that at CRC 8, next CRC, was drafted and adopted by CRC. At COP, the COP at its 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th meetings, that means in 2013, 2015, 2017, and 2019, considered the listing of Paraquat dichloride. However, due to the lack of consensus, this chemical is still not listed and is diverted to COP 10 for further consideration. The next chemical recommended for listing is Fenthion, and this is also severely hazardous pesticide formulation. You can also find this chemical in the website under the dedicated web page under Chemicals tab, Chemicals recommended for listing, where you have all the information available. And in this slide, we have all the documents from CRC 9 from October 2013, which provides the SHPF proposal submitted by chat, accompanied by all the supporting documents provided by the country and additionally collected by the Secretariat. The proposal was based on human health incidents and problems to the applicators under the local conditions of use in the proposing party caused by these pesticide formulations. In this slide, you can see like an excerpt of the incident reporting form, which provides what type of incidents were reported in the country throughout the period of between 2009 and 2012. It's important to indicate that this incident report was consisting solely of one incident of a pesticide applicator which had hypertension, and the effects were observed 1 hour after application, in line with the acute toxicity effect of the formulation, as definition of SHPF implies in the context of the convention. And intoxicated person showed symptoms like vomiting, abundant salivation, and titubation 1 hour after the application. He was immediately brought to the hospital. Despite the effort of the doctors, he passed away 4 days after he was released from the hospital. In addition, there was a second lethal intoxication of an operator following handling and treatment with Fenthion that occurred also in 2009, and also another operator had gone into coma for 1 week under the same circumstances. However, the second and the third incident, they are not part of the incident report itself. The applicators were using motorized PEG sprayers to treat quelea birds that were affecting the grains in Chad. This was the basis for CRC at its 9th meeting to recommend listing of Fenthion into Annex 3 of the Convention, which at the next 10th meeting adopted the draft decision guidance document, which contains the main information from the proposal itself and additional scientific literature that is supporting the hazardous properties of this formulation. At COP level, at its 7th meeting initially, this pesticide formulation was not listed because there was a lack of consensus. And the same happened at its 8th and 9th meeting in 2017 and 2019. At COP 8, there was a decision adopted that was already mentioned by my colleague Yoon and by Eva, which goes in line the fact that countries can use information exchange mechanism and provide additional information coming from national level about this formulation, and in the same time can provide import decisions for these chemicals. But I will talk about that in the following slides. The listing of Fenthion again will be considered at COP 10 level. The last chemical recommended for listing belongs to the categories of industrial chemicals. This was the oldest chemical that is pending listing into the Annex 3 list, and initially was considered at the COP 3rd meeting. As you can see from the slide, the chemical was considered initially at the first CRC meeting based on the notification submitted from EU to ban Chrysolite asbestos, and further the notifications submitted by Australia and Chile to severely restrict the same chemical. This information is available in the dedicated web page for chemicals recommended for listing that contains also all the supporting documents provided by the parties and considered by the CRC experts. At the first meeting of the Chemical Review Committee, it was agreed that this chemical should be listed, or actually CRC1 already recommended listing to the conference of the parties of this chemical into Annex 3. The second meeting of the Chemical Review Committee agreed to the draft text of the decision guidance document. And I would like to mention that the European Community action was based on risk evaluation made by the Independent Scientific Committee, and its conclusions were that Chrysolite asbestos was carcinogenic to humans and that there was no threshold of exposure below which asbestos did not pose carcinogenic risks. On the other hand, the Chilean regulatory action was taken on the basis of review of the health effect of Chrysolite asbestos and the evaluation of occupational exposure and the fact that there was no thresholds for the carcinogenic effects of Chrysolite asbestos. Whereas the last notification was from the Australian Regulatory Authority, was addressing the human health risks concerns and was taken at national and state level, focusing on occupational, public health and environmental risks associated with the use of Chrysolite in Australia. And it was noted that in Australia, the Chrysolite asbestos was classified as known carcinogen, and human exposure was associated with excessive risks of asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma. At COP level, already at third COP meeting, there was a decision adopted for Chrysolite asbestos. And it was decided that at this level that the requirements that are set out in Article 5, including the criteria set out in Annex 2 of the Convention, and the requirements set out in Article 7 of the Convention, that basically this chemical have been met. And as well, COP encouraged party to make use of all the available information on this chemical, like the others, to assist other parties, in particular developing countries and countries with economies in transitions, to make informed decision and with regards to import and management of Chrysolite, and to inform other parties about this decision in accordance to Article 14 of the Convention text. So, being reminded of the importance of these COP decisions in line with the provisions of Article 14 of the Rotterdam Convention, we can ask ourselves, and you can pose the same question to yourselves as TNAs and national stakeholders. From your country's perspective, what is the status of the information exchange mechanism in correlation with these COP decisions that we already mentioned, that are directly linked to one of the most important articles of the Convention and the provisions of the Convention, that's Article 14, which at the end is in the core of the PIC procedure itself. So what is the awareness among the parties? Do you really make use of the information that is available in the decision guidance documents that are developed by CRC in order to make use and summarize the information provided and submitted by the parties in the notifications or in the proposals, and whether you really use the all the scientifically relevant information included in the DGs. So what is the most important aspects of the Article 14? The parties are supposed to exchange scientific, technical, economic, and legal information concerning all the chemicals that are falling into the scope of the Convention, including toxicological, ecotoxicological, and safety information. Part of this information is part of the notifications itself. Then the parties are supposed to provide all the publicly available information on domestic regulatory actions relevant to the objectives of the Convention, and that is protection of human health and environment. And also to provide information to other parties directly with the communication between each other or through the Secretariat on all the domestic regulatory actions that substantially restrict one or more uses of the chemical. So we are aware that only few parties are informing other parties about their decisions on import or domestic regulatory actions for these 5 chemicals. And the small information that is available is actually already incorporated into the Appendix 6 of the PIC Circular. To remind you, the PIC Circular is the key implementation document of the Rotterdam Convention, both for the operation of the PIC procedure and as a main mechanism for exchange of information on hazardous chemicals in line and within the scope of the Convention. We are publishing it biannually, twice a year, every 12th of June and 12th of December. And this Appendix 6 was actually added lastly into the PIC Circular with the idea to support these COP decisions on chemicals recommended for listing into Annex 3 list. Namely, the COP decision RC33, 44, RC68, 86, RC87, and RC95. And also paragraph 1 of Article 14, that the one I already mentioned and explained in detail. So this Appendix 6 of the PIC Circular contains 2 parts. Part A provides the reference of the information that has been submitted by the parties on their decisions concerning the management of these 5 chemicals recommended for listing. And we are providing, as you can see, the link to the notifications and to the chemicals web page dedicated for these specific 5 specific chemicals. And in the same time, that means we have the submitting parties that were the reason behind the activation of the CRC process and the recommendation of CRC to list these chemicals into Annex 3 and further on the COP decisions. But also we are providing the name or listing the name of the countries that additionally provided notifications for the same chemicals. This information is available in the respective PIC circular, in the chemicals webpage, and is also available in the country profile. And the second part B of the Appendix 6 of the PIC circular contains basically all the voluntary import decisions for these chemicals recommended for listing, using the provisions and of the COP decisions for these 5 chemicals. The Secretariat basically is publishing the import decisions for these chemicals in part B of the PIC circular. And so far, only 5 countries has used this chance and this voluntary mechanism available, which is mirroring basically the obligatory mechanism that we have under Article 10, and the fact that countries shall submit import decisions for the Annex 3 listed chemicals on one hand, and then the exporting party should comply with these importing decisions from the importing country side. So far, only Canada and European Union has submitted import decisions for Chrysolite asbestos. Qatar has used this opportunity to submit import decision for Paraquat dichloride, whereas Nigeria is the 5th country that used this chance, this opportunity to submit import decision for Fenthion. So, as you can see from what is already mentioned, and using the provisions of the convention and mechanisms already established under the PIC procedure and Annex 3 listed chemicals, which is endorsed and supported with the specific COP decisions that are actually your party's decisions, you can further extend the visibility of these chemicals, even though they are not yet listed, and provide additional information from national level to the other parties via the mechanisms that are offered by the Secretariat and the PIC circular, for example. So we need to see this presentation from the Secretariat side and the COP decision addressing this problem from this light and from this perspective, namely giving a chance for all the parties in deciding or providing information how these chemicals are being used at national level, and actually incentivizing them to share this information with the rest of the parties and with the global community, maybe even taking certain risk mitigation measures at national level, if not taken already, and sharing this information with the Secretariat. And as you know, we take it from there and use our platforms via the PIC circular, we are via the clearinghouse mechanism, via the website to share this information with all of you. I would like to mention also that this is the first from the series of webinars that is coming on potential alternatives to chemicals recommended for listing. The same webinar will be available also not only in English, but will be provided also in French, in Arabic, and in Spanish, and they are already in preparation, and this information will be shared with you. The first one on alternatives to Fenthion for Quelea bird control will be 2 days from now on Wednesday. And I'm sure that you already got the invitation from 2:30 till 4:30 p.m. Rome time. And we expect you to see you there and to be part also on this upcoming series on alternatives to the chemicals recommended for listing webinars that are coming in future, the first one being on Wednesday. Thank you very much for your attention.